Dharma, to rid us of all distorted views. So today I should finish the text. So we finished chapter 5 of the annotated commentary to the Madhyamaka Hridaya Karika. So at the end of his Madhyamaka Avatara, Chandrakirti says, so having done the steady reflection and practice and meditation on emptiness, then the Buddha treads on the path to enlightenment, and the Bodhisattva with the two wings of a swan, the conventional and the ultimate wisdom of the conventional and ultimate reality, goes beyond the shore of the other to the other shore of the ocean. So at this time, well, we have found the Buddha, found this human life, and then met with the teaching of the Buddha, and particularly the Nalanda tradition, the Sanskrit tradition of Buddhism. And we have in Tibetan the over 100 volumes of Ganjur and over 200 volumes of Dengyur in Tibetan, translated by our great kind Lord Tsawas. So at such a time, as Gongdan Rinpoche has said, having found this precious human life, there is danger that this precious life will slip from your hand without being able to extract any meaning from it. So, if you could what you should do is to make this life a meaningful one, so that you could help yourself in the next lives to be also meaningful, and thereby your prayer to the Guru to lead you to take care of you and guide you from life after life, and also the Heart Sutra mantra referring to the 5-stage path by Gati and so forth. We should try to, at this time when we have found a precious life with the eight leisurely qualities and the 10 endowments, we should do our best to make this life a meaningful one. So when I was a kid, I didn't have any interest in in my studies of the text. But when I was around 10 years old, then I took more serious around. When I turned maybe 13 or something, I started taking more interest. When I started with visiting the monastic institutions, and then particularly thanks to Ngotop Tsognyi, who was very keen on Madhyamaka view, I began to the interest in the Madhyamaka view I began to take interest in it. So it's been over 70 years since I began thinking seriously about Madhyamaka view, and especially after coming into exile, in a day, I think or reflect on the middle way view so much. So taking interest in the middle way view, it's been over 60, 70 years. Though I was interested in the Madhyamaka view, I had found bodhicitta to be something really good but very difficult to cultivate. So I even told Dada Rinpoche one time that it's very difficult for me to have bodhicitta. And Dada Rinpoche told me that he has developed bodhicitta within himself, so it will actually, you'll be able to develop it if you do meditation. And so when I was teaching the great treatise on the mantra path here, I have said at that time that it's very difficult for me to have bodhicitta. And then after receiving the teaching on the Bodhisattva Charya Avataras in 1967, I've found that Bodhisattva Charya Avatara is really helpful to develop bodhicitta. And so Kondal Lama Rinpoche Tenzin Gyatso himself told me that that I should teach these texts as much as possible. And so I have been teaching it numerous times. And then since that time, I have been feeling bodhicitta in the last 40 or 50 years, closer. I feel closer to this experience of bodhicitta. So what I'm trying to say is that you should not think that I have not just remained idle, thinking that I am His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And so, because I was a lazy student, in order to spur me on to my study, the Ling Rinpoche used to keep a whip. So my elder brother Lobsang Sampen and I were studying together, and Ling Rinpoche used to keep two whips, one whip for him and another whip, which is yellow in color, for me. So the Dalai Lama, as the Dalai Lama, I was supposed to be a holy person, and therefore he kept this yellow whip. And so, but even at that age, young age, I was quite clever to know that if this holy whip was used on me, I wouldn't have any different pain, a holy pain as such. And therefore, developing experience of the Dharma must happen through the process of hearing first the teaching, and then following it with reflection day and night, and then do meditation. And so when you actually reflect on the bodhicitta and the emptiness, view of emptiness in the daytime, so much, then even in your sleep, you will have dreams about it. And so sometimes it's quite strange that if you could actually reflect on these points during the dream state, and then it seems it has more impetus to gain further deeper understanding of it during the waking state as well. And so what you should know is that this person, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, had actually developed these insights and experience of bodhicitta and insight into emptiness, view of emptiness, through his hard work. And so I can tell for sure that if you really put effort and be diligent, then you will be able to develop these experiences. So with regard to the view of emptiness, I can tell that what is said in the seven Dalai Lamas. So I'm not able to yet have the experience or insight into emptiness to such an extent that I could stay in absorption, so that all these diversities of things kind of dissolve or disappear from within my view as such. So I can say that I have developed the experience based on reflection, the understanding of emptiness based on reflection on it. So in order to gain the understanding which is based on meditation, one should actually develop that of the path of preparation. So in the beginning you may feel something to be impossible to develop, but through your effort, gradually what could happen is that it will become your own experience. So with the practice of bodhicitta, what you actually experience is that everyone around you are your friends, and there would be nobody's whom you would call enemies as such. And then we all do sadhanas of different deities, such as Yamantaka, and because of having received teaching in the Sakya tradition, I also do in the Lamde tradition, I also do He Vajra practice. So if you could really have a good understanding and experience or insight into emptiness and bodhicitta, then you can actually find the tantric practices to be more effective. So without the understanding of emptiness, there's no basis for you to do any tantric practice effectively. So the path that is taught in the Sutrayana, the greater your experience of the path of the Sutrayana, you will be able to actually see the profundity of Tantra as well. So regarding the teaching of the Buddha, there is the general structure teaching of the Buddha, which is the Sutrayana teachings, and then Tantra is a specialized teaching, where the Buddha himself arose in the form of Vajradhara, although there are some exceptions to some tantras in the Kriya Tantra, where the Buddha appeared also in the form of a monk. And so Nyengun Songrapa uses this term. They're dividing the teaching of the Buddha into these two categories of general structure of the teaching and then the specialized teachings. And so I make this distinction on the basis of the sutra being the general structure teaching and the tantra being the specialized teaching. So through the process of study, hearing, reflection, and meditation, if you could actually make the teachings in the Sutrayana, such as those of the profound path and the extensive path, then you will be able to see the specialty of Tantra, how effective it is, and so forth. And so, by spreading this wide, the broad wings of both conventional and ultimate reality, as I explained earlier, Master Nagarjuna was the one who explicated on the implicit teaching of the Panchaparamita Sutras. So you should understand the different philosophical views, the philosophical views of the different philosophical schools. And so we are going to go through Master Bhavaviveka's. So when I first met Karen Rinpoche Kunga Wangchuk, I mean, he was someone who was imprisoned in his birthplace. Since I was, at that time, I was also still very keen to receive explanatory transmissions of texts. And then I found out that he had the explanatory transmission of Madhyamaka Avatara Bhashya, which is the auto-commentary to Madhyamaka Avatara. And then also the text on the Pramana texts, Pramana Samuchaya, and therefore I thought that it was indispensable for me to receive teaching on these texts from him. And then he gave, in the case of this another Sakya Kempo, Sangye Tenzin, I found out when he was also in Bodh Gaya, we were having a conversation, and then I found out that he had the explanatory transmission of the stages of meditation by Kamala Shila. So he had received it from a Kamba Lama in Samye Monastery. So usually when I when I think of receiving some transmissions from some lamas, I usually consult Yongdzin Ling Rinpoche, but at that time I didn't have the time to consult or with him in Bodh Gaya. So I have these Sakya Lamas from whom I have received in transmissions. I also received a transmission of the Vinaya Sutra by Gunaprabha from Yonzali Rinpoche. So Yonzali Rinpoche told me that he had, to the best of his information, he had passed on whatever transmissions he had to me. And so Khenpo Sangye Tenzin, Khen Rinpoche Kunga Wangchuk was the one from whom I received the transmission of this text. So in the beginning of the text, when he was annotating the title of the text, he said he has written in the central Uzang Tibetan dialects. That's not needed. And also for the Bhutanese, there's no need to say, for you to say Dzongkha in the language of Dzongkha. So now to go through the realities of, or the system of the Sankhyas. The Prakriti, or the primordial Prakriti, is unconscious, with the three constituents which is the primal factor and all-pervasive, so being permanent, unborn, and being the doer of everything, as well as pervasive, all-pervasive, with these qualities of the nature of procreation. The self is the opposite of this. Thus, the primordial matter and self should incessantly be meditated upon by the Sankhya practitioner. When the mind is dominated by the constituents of sattva, the self imitates the operations of the intellect, either through the arising of a reflection or by means of a transformation. So I am one and matter is another. By realizing this truth, the self, having turned away from cause and effect, is said to be liberated. So when the mind is dominated by a constituent of sattva and so forth, and alternatively, other followers of Sankhya declare the doctrine of that matter having fulfilled its purpose as expressed by the understanding, I am not, it is not mine. It is liberated as a result of compliance to the self. Thus, primordial materiality, the pradhana, and the self have been explained to as employed by the Sankhyas, but now they are to be scrutinized. Consciousness is claimed by us not to be self or Atman. Consciousness is the cognition of an object. In the absence of an object, it has no existence. What now? May this self be conscious or unconscious? Self be, conscious or unconscious. By the reasoning, the unburnt does not burn due to the absence of burnables. It is, as we said before, regarding the non-existence of consciousness in the absence of an object of knowledge. Therefore, by the example of burning, an intrinsically conscious self cannot be established. In the transmigratory existence, samsara, the cognition of an intellect, is claimed by Sankhya to assume the image of an object, and because a condition is dependent on a substance, that cognition of the intellect is dependent on the self. The self is said to be unchanged and self-sufficient. This is a defective statement. Consciousness is nothing but the cognition of an object. What else could it be supposed to be? It is not logical that the intellect is identical to consciousness, as it was a cause. It has a cause, just like a pot. Therefore, consciousness is not identical to the intellect. If it would be identical to the intellect, we say the following. If you say that the intellect should be established as something other than consciousness, we reply that there is no evidence for that claim. And if you say that there may be absence, an absence, there is a consciousness, it's intellect. You are done by agreement with our position. The idea of an unborn self having consciousness as its intrinsic nature is not reasonable, since it is unborn. If the consciousness belongs to the non-existent self, it is considered by us to be only the intellect. As an activity of the knower, not distinct from the activity in the intellect, is claimed by you, we reply, even if a difference should exist between the self and the intellect, it is without distinction. Therefore, if one does not exist, the other too is non-existent. Wherever conception of a self there may be, then it is considered by us to be correct from one point of view, but the opposite from another point of view, like the view of Khan as a Khan. In the perspective from which the perception of a self is correct, namely by convention, samriti, it is merely proving that what is already is proved, since that conception, when correct, only denotes the mental faculties. It is not considered by the self as a self by us. As for the truth of the conception of attributes such as omnipresence ascribed to self, there is no evidence for it, either in reality or conventionally. You say that there is no consciousness in the unconscious matter, nor any modification in the conscious self, Purusha. To whom then does the knowledge of reality dawn, so that they may attain liberation? Even if it is said that she, that is matter, conforms to consciousness, the conviction, I am not that, and so forth, ascribed to her, would be illogical, as she has no consciousness. How much more illogical this would be in the absence of that conformity. Nor is her turning away logical, as she is common to many. It is claimed by us to be like the turning away of a common harlot, one of whose lovers has died. When the mind is dominated by the constituent sattva, how is the realization of truth thought to be restricted to one individual, when the self is not separated in space from the selves, not covered? In the perception of sound and so forth too, and likewise in qualities such as virtue and vice, as it is equally questionable, a restriction which is not demonstrated is deemed by us to be non-existent. If you say that the self transforms, then due to transforming, just like sour milk, the self is unconscious, nor is it causeless, nor omnipresent. The defects just stated likewise apply to the unchangeable consciousness, just as to an original image and on account of the reflection. Objection: even though the close proximity of an original image causes the occurrence of a reflection in the water, no fundamental change in the water has occurred. Similarly, even though the close proximity of the object recognized by the intellect causes the occurrence of a reflection in the consciousness, no fundamental change to the consciousness has occurred. Answer: since the self is said to contain the reflection of the object recognized by the intellect, it must be caused, non-omniscient, and devoid of unchangeable consciousness. Thus, as defined, it runs counter to its own intrinsic nature. And because the self does not conceptualize the statement, I am another is not logical. I am another is not logical. If you say that it is not a defect being employed as a metaphor, then perhaps liberation itself may be metaphorical. You say the undifferentiated matter, pradhan, exists because the separate evolutes have a logical connection, and because they are transformations of matter, because of the relation of cause and effect, because it is the locus of causal capacity, and because there is no division of manifoldness. What has been described in any way, let it be described like that. Just like the shards of pots, so too the separate evolutes arise from that which possesses them. Therefore, the separate parts have a common cause. If it is to be proved by this that the evolutes have causes, that is merely proving what is already proved. And by failing to prove both the ordered connection and the nature of the single cause, you have failed to prove your position. If it is claimed that the evolutes have a common origin, can be proved by their having common properties, then just as before, there is no evidence either of commonality or of particularity. Nor do we consider the presumed quality of having pleasure and so on, for their inherent nature to be comparable to the aggregates of sensation, as aggregates already individually between pleasure, pain, and so on, alternate individually between pleasure, pain, and so on. Furthermore, you are lacking examples to prove that delusion, too, is of the nature of sensation, because it proceeds from a cause. It cannot be established, just like pleasure and pain. Even disregarding the alternation between pleasure and pain and so on, your conclusion is still unsupported, owing to the defect occurring to your thesis from the argument of a logical connection, etc., as the particular qualities of being born, endless, and so on are contradicted. The individual causes which you postulate alternate with respect to the three constituents of primordial matter, if they are preceded by a single cause, they will be inconsistent. There will be inconsistency among them. Similarly, if they have different causes, there is no evidence for the existence of primordial matter.
So if there is therefore no lack of an established example supporting of different causes as they exist potentially, then like before there is no evidence. So verse number 130, verse number 36. If they exist manifestly, you will have fortified your position in establishing the identity of cause and effect, as with the doctrine above. In establishing identity between cause and effect by the doctrine of a single origin, proving what is proved, and in imagining them to be different, like before, ideology of defects. By this reasoning, making inferences from preceding thoughts is ruled out, and causes always alternate between pleasure, pain, and so on. If in truth there is no difference, as was said, because of the lack of division of time in the state of non-difference, your position will conflict with common knowledge. If in the disappearance of the sandalwood tree and in the emergence of splinters, the sandalwood tree does not cease to exist, that is proved, and even if you refer to the sixth period of time, it still does exist like the present moment, ceases to exist immediately, but is not this just so much exertion to cover the holes in your doctrine? Does not the defect stated follow it as the utterance of the Utkaga of the Gata? If similarity is imagined to be the meaning of Hetu, there is ambiguity as to which is the cause and which the effect, and if it is imagined to be non-difference, no cause can be established. And if it is claimed that ear and other sense organs must have a subject as they have no consciousness, then if an experiencer without the specified attributes, proving what is proved, but how does the function of an experiencer agree with the attributes of indifferent, eternal, and so on? The state of experiences, sense object, is not claimed from indifference even when consciousness is present. Verse number 45 and 46. What has been said that the inactivity of things is proved by their being objects of knowledge is recognized by like pleasure and delusion. Pain too should be understood to be inactive on account of being caused, unconscious, an object of speech or measurable like delusion. If you claim that the order, connection, and so forth are causes of the existence of the separate parts, truly those not alternate with respect to the constituents of matter. Thus, while the relation of cause and effect and so forth is proved by the reasoning of having causes, there is inconsistency in your position with regard to the attributes of the causes. The nature of the splinters cannot be comprehended without taking into account their form, etc. Thus, although in one sense the splinters and their form, etc. are connected to the sandalwood tree, The sandalwood tree and the splinter are fundamentally different, since they constitute different entities. Why? Because the sandalwood tree has one form, whereas the splinter can have many. In the same way that there is one perceiver but can be many objects of perception. Thus there is a difference between the splinters and the sandalwood tree. Madhyamika adherents do not commonly accept the notion that the present moment exists, even if one maintains that the present moment does exist in order to prove the identity of cause and effect. We reject this proof since the beginning segment of a moment of time can be differentiated from the middle segment, which in turn can be differentiated from both the beginning and the final segment, which in turn can be differentiated from the first two segments. Thus, since the present moment is in this way a composite construction, it cannot be said to exist. The object of enjoyment recurs and enjoyer precisely because it is an object of enjoyment. It is like a seat that is precisely designed to accommodate a sitter. Thus, the comprehender of the object holds the status of being the enjoyer of the object of comprehension. The object of enjoyment recurs and enjoyer precisely because it is an object of enjoyment. It is like a seat that is precisely designed to accommodate a sitter. Thus, the comprehender of the object holds the status of being the enjoyer of the object of comprehension. From the Madhyamika perspective, it is the enjoyer, the sitter, that is a composite construction, the nature of which is reliant upon the object of enjoyment. Thus, consciousness has been shown to be a composite construction, and thus you are attempting inconsistently to establish the opposite of that which characterizes the enjoyer. Consciousness being the cognition and object, it is an attribute bhava. As such, it must be dependent upon an underlying substance. The relationship can be compared to the relationship between the dyeing of a cloth, the cognition of an object, and the cloth itself, the object, or that between the cooking of rice, the cognition, and the rice itself, the object. Accordingly, so-called Chaitanya is nothing more than Buddhi. Regardless of whether or not the self is transformed in the process of acquiring knowledge, perceiving sound and so forth, how does that acquisition take place? Next, so we finish here the chapter number 7. This is the determination of reality according to Vedanta.
Chapter 5, 6 done. 7, I just did a script translation. So we're on the 7th chapter, which is the entering the reality or the system of the Vaisheshikas. So here, to enter the Vaisheshika system, intellect, etc., this desire or wish and hatred form, effort, non-religious consciousness, so non-religious practices, consciousness, conditioned things, these 9 qualities of a self, the meditator who uproots them and maintains in his or her own mind, I am, without a thought, to understand, uproots and overcomes them, and maintains this thought that I is without thought, is understood to have reached the moksha or liberation in the Vaisheshika system. And since we have extensively argued these through the reasons given previously to show the false nature of their position, which is refuting them already and refuted them already, or that entities was refuted already, because of which all these attributes such as attachment and hatred do not exist, and that just as the sky flower can't be a cause of honey, likewise the birthless cannot be a doer of or creator because of something or somebody, for something or somebody to perform an action. Definitely it must be a doer. Just as the cause of the honey is not the sky flower, what is not born cannot be born, just like the sky flower is not born. The nature of the element, etc., means that it does not exist ultimately. Consciousness doesn't depend on a permanent soul, faculty, object, and mind, which arise through the meeting of the faculty, object, and mind, because of possessing its cause, like a vase, for example. It is not tenable that the intellect is an attribute of the soul, since it takes birth, and just as the form, etc., are not accepted as the attributes of the soul. Since it is a collection, it is suitable to be selfless because of being impermanent. In this way, happiness, sorrow, etc., all of them should be understood to be absolutely refuted. If it is argued, it is not that the intellect meets with the self because of its being impermanent, but because of its being the chitta, because of the chitta being impermanent. And chitta or mind is not accepted as permanent because it is a subject matter of an a linguistic expression like a vase. This mind is not created by self because it is an efficacious thing, like happiness, for example. Moreover, since there cannot be supported without the support, although the supporting self has been rejected, to examine here the supported mind, there is no self because it does not occur in dependence on causes and conditions. Just like the sky flower, if you still assert that there is a self within the continuity of the collection of the aggregates, therefore the universals of the self indeed exist. I shall examine that too. This so-called self is not all-pervading, not permanent, and that it is not an object of cognition. Because that likewise, like a vase, if you say it changes when an intellect arises, then your assertion of a permanence as an attribute of the self does not hold anymore. If indeed there is no change in the self when intellect arises, then the self does not know anything. How can it both know and not know things? It cannot. If you say, then there is meeting between self and intellect because they are like a stick and its holder. Since I have already refuted the meeting in this chapter, It is not right to relate to the meeting indeed. Moreover, the other attributes of the self, like joy, sorrow, and the strength of effort, and desire, hatred, and too are refuted in the same way. The permanent attributes cannot be based on a self with the nature of permanence because they have causes, just like a vase. Or the attributes of a permanent self is not cognized as a bliss because of having birth, just like the body itself, etc. For example, we reject it as attributes. Of the self. Indeed, these impermanent attributes are not cognized together in the permanent self. Also, the connection of the self with the big universal being, coexistent with self, cannot be both existent and non-existent. Even if a permanent self exists, it makes no sense to join it with the so-called the big universal. Without the existence of the permanent self, there cannot be joining with the big universal, like the child of a barren woman. If you assert it illustrates the particulars, what illustrates or reveals the particulars, what illustrates is a different phenomenon. The universal does not illustrate the existence of self. How can it be illustrating agent? This also answers the unfeasibility of the relating numbers like one and a person as well. If you assert that because of the connection with universals, etc., a being too is cognized, same as the universals, as also the Purushas changes through meeting with other conditions such as that universal, then when Purusha becomes liberated, it is neither existent nor non-existent nor many as well. This self without attributes is not one, not subtle, not even big. It's not permanent, not impermanent, not another, nor not another too. Such a Purusha like the self, how can the content of the words or the subject matters of substance, quality, and actions, etc., be absent, even if they were deliberately kept secret and concealed? How can they reveal themselves? Reply: because they are fixated, they are not feasible for seeing the reality. Intellect, etc., which falsely arise, are annihilated, since they are impermanent. Being born from untrue attributes or marks, this earth, etc., comes about together with the permanent atoms, and therefore are accepted as untrue, as they are viewed permanent in nature. The universal, which is different from the self, separate from it, object, self and permanent object, it is not accepted to have a relation with the self because it is non-existent. Intellect, just as a generally existent intellect is asserted to be universal, similarly, with respect to the relating with numbers such as one, just as the learned ones find tenable to consider the self and others, such as earth, as neither in the nature of number, etc., nor in the nature of non-number, etc., the intellect should be realized as such too. Self is a quality unrelated to the attributes, such as intellect, suffering, happiness, desire, hatred, etc., just like number. This means when one becomes liberated, it is not liberation from one number one. Likewise, it is not proved that one is liberated from the attributes such as intellect. Therefore, self devoid of attributes of the intellect, etc., is non-existent. Moreover, if you say, when the intellect remains in its nature, that is liberation, though the intellect is essentially not different from the object, such as the form. When some mental consciousness becomes its nature and wishes to connect or apply to the self, recalling all the past situations, and the consciousness arises, there would be there would be this absurd consequence that there, or the same past situation, samsaric situation would recur. This is the answer. Because of rejecting the birth of non-existent phenomena, that birth does not apply to the self as well. Mind and self without special parts are also not accepted to be the basis and the based. Though both the mind and self are existent, since they are not physical, they are not accepted as the basis and the based. Because of such many such discursive thoughts, reasons, just as Uluverdens do not accept liberation through seeing the attributes of substance, etc. Likewise, they do not assert liberation through familiarization with the 6 objects of knowledge, such as substance and so on. These examples do not assert the occurrence of intellect with regard to the realities such as substance, qualities, karma, gathering, universal indifference, because they do not apprehend the qualities such as livelihood, life, contamination, vow, aging, etc. Like the mind appropriating them, the Jainas' reality of livelihood, etc. The reality of the Vaisheshikas to give rise to the individual, aberration of bad vows, and since they are absent of correct logic, the mind should never be delighted with them. So that's the
reading from the chapter number 8, the determination of reality according to Vedanta school. The adherents of the Vedanta state outside our own school, one who really knows the self, Atman, is extremely difficult to find. How could those who hate the notion of a self, maintaining that all conditioned entities are empty, of intrinsic nature and momentary, possibly often liberation? An intelligent man conquers that when through his divine eye he perceives the transcendent person, Purusha, who is on the other side of darkness, radiant like the sun, and who is the Self and the Great Lord. When the seed perceives the golden color, Lord, through the eyes of meditation as the agent, then having abundant demerit and merit, he will attain the non-active, non-conceptual supreme unity with a golden colored person. Question: if he is beyond the three spheres of existence, how could he be the agent? And if he is so distant, whose Lord is he? Answer: in spite of his distant abode, he is all-pervading. Whatever is past, present, and future is all regarded as the person. He is within and without, distant and nearby, and he is the agent of actions. Questions: if the person is one, if the person is one, why is he able to undertake a variety of activities and yet remain unimpaired? This is shown by the following example. All entities are born out of that person like threads coming out of a spider, which at the same time remains unimpaired. Wise man absolved in him through the practice of meditation, perceiving him with the eye of wisdom, to not come to be reborn into another existence, if he has not perceived the person. The whole world, which is mortal by nature, cannot be immortal, just as fire cannot be cold. Therefore, it is inconsistent that immortality could be obtained if one is not awakened to become absorbed into immortal person. The following serves the purpose of eulogizing his great prowess. This entire world is pervaded by him, than whom nothing superior exists, and than whom nothing greater or more subtle is found. He is endowed with the power to attenuate himself, the power to extend himself, the power to levitate himself, supremacy over the elements, etc., the power to control, the power to reach the irresistibility of will, and the power to proceed at will. Although he is one, he has the nature which epitomizes the manifoldness of three-realm universe. Therefore, to him who sees all beings become very self in that person, and the ignorant and the learned, outcasts and Brahmin, etc., are all equal. If someone were to raise the questions regarding this person, who is said to be all-pervading, and from whom, although he is one, the bodies of all kinds of living beings, such as gods and man, are said to be born, how is it that he does not become a nature which is non-eternal and non-omnipresent like all embodied beings? The following is said as a rejoinder. When a part is produced or destroyed, the space in it does not have the same nature of being produced or destroyed. When bodies, etc., are born and die, they cannot be considered to have the same nature as the self. If the objection is raised that the oneself is many like space in pots, we reply that space is one because it is not differentiated through the breaking of pots, and because it is considered the same for all pots. The self therefore does not exist separately in all embodied beings. In spite of the multiplicity of the bodies, the self is the same in all of them. Now, to prove the oneness of self by the different approach. Though the parts, etc., may be different, there is no difference in the clay. In the same way, there is a difference between bodies. The self is not differentiated. Since yourself is omnipresent, if one person is happy, everybody else should be also happy. Just as when space in a pot, which is one, becomes covered by such things as dust and smoke, the same is certainly not the case for all pots. So when the self of a person, being one, possesses pleasure, etc., it is not the case that the self of all other persons also come to possess pleasure, etc. How do happiness and suffering arise at all in each of these individual continua? The answer is, it is because one is unawakened to absorption into the immortal Purusha. That one who does not know the self collects karma and experiences the result, which is good or bad, just as one who dreams imagines himself to have real experiences. Since the person is the agent and the enjoyer, it may be objected that inasmuch as he accumulates and enjoys evil deeds as well as merits, he is himself an evildoer, etc. But we say, although he resides in the body, he is not defiled when he enjoys, since he is not attached, just like a king who behaves according to his pleasure, and that Purusha remains innocent of transgressions. Thus, to follow up the above line of argument, when a yogin practicing meditation comes to know the one, all-pervasive, eternal, supreme Brahman, the immortal state, then he is not born into another existence. The characteristics of that self, which is removed from all enjoyment of wholesome and unwholesome actions, are extolled in the following. That self is eternal because it is capable of being objectified by the yogin at all times. It is non-conceptual because it is something different from senses and mind, and it is beyond the realm of speech because it is not within the reach of the mind. Various words like the Brahman, Atman, Purusha, Ishvara, Sarvatraka, Nidhi, etc. are however applied to it by those whose minds are led astray by difference. The meaning of the other such terms is to be understood just like the meaning of the term self. Bhavaviveka's critical examination of Vedanta philosophy, as far as this teaching in the Purva Bhaksha and the meaning which has been stated previously in the work, Prakarana is concerned, it is to be critically investigated by persons who do not take up a dogmatic position and who are free from attachment and anger, because a person whose mind is clouded by attachment to a position does not even understand the truth. Refutation of the liberation as a result of perception of the self. The existence of the self has already been refuted by me in the Tattva Jnana, Samma, and the Vaisheshika chapters of, and so has its status as the cause of the world. Therefore, liberation that results from being Darsana, that self is entirely false, since it is only mentally propagated. There is also the following great fault in the view of a Purusha. The innate belief in an existing individuality to a personal identity, which is to hold that the five aggregates of attachment are a self, and what belongs to the self, what leads to non-tranquility, even of the animal, even for the minds of animals. Therefore, this is not the right way to liberation, since it is the root of all afflictions, like pride in the self, delusion regarding a self, belief in the self, love of a self, etc. This belief in a personal identity is in even greater degree promoted by you in the Vedanta. For those people who cherish a belief in I and mine, full of belief in a personal identity as they are, liberation also arises out of that from which samsara arises. That is, from the belief in a personal identity, etc. The Omniscient One has said that having destroyed the 20 high mountain peaks of Satya Drishti, such as thinking that form is the self, there is form in the self possesses form, the self is inside form, etc., one will see reality. But you say that the very thing which increases samsara is the cause of liberation. But this is like someone who tries to put out fire by heaping fuel on it. Objection: that which is not the cause of peace can, however, become the cause of peace by some method, just as one who is intoxicated becomes free from intoxication due to more liquor. For one who does not know the right method, if he relies on the view of a self, defilements will arise. But for the yogin meditating on that very same view of a self, defilements will be pacified. If cessation of samsara could arise on the basis of seeing that self, then someone suffering from indigestion will recover by eating, just like a person recovering from intoxication through more intoxicating liquor. The adherents of the Vedanta postulate that the self appears in two forms: the self that is bound up with the so-called body and liberated, and the self that rests in the Supreme. The cognition that has as its object, the self which rests in the Supreme is not considered true, because in this way there is attachment to the self as an object, and therefore movement in relation to that self will occur, like the idea of the self occurring in the regard to the body, etc. Objection: this Supreme Self is imagined to be a self by the power of the residues of attachment to the self. Answer: nothing at all is established by imagination. Refutation of the self as agent. Even if the self is by nature imagined, what does it make in your opinion if you say that it makes a cognition that has form, speech, etc. as an object? That is not logical. I prove this as follows. Cognitions which is form, etc. as an object do not arise having the self as agent, because their origination is dependent on conditions such as the group of sense object, sense organ, consciousness, and attention, just as fire depend on the magnifying glass. So if one performs such actions as seeing and hearing, what is the use of imagining a self which is different from object, sense organ, and cognition? Moreover, nor can sound, which is the nature of syllables, can be regarded as having the self as agent because it is audible or because it is a sound, just like an echo. By virtue of these arguments, the remaining physical activities such as going and coming, characterized by a motion of hands and feet, etc., have implicitly been negated as having the self as agent. Therefore, our self does not exist apart from the body and sense organs. The act of discernment arises when one has understood by discrimination that which originates from the assembled causal conditions of object, organ, consciousness, and attention. The act of recollection arises due to remembrance of the object experienced by the sixfold group of cognitions. The act of insight arises by virtue of an insight of a specific nature, discriminating the individual and general characteristics of dharmas. The act of feeling arises out of the experience of the object. Not even the slightest action of a self is apprehended apart from the mind, which is the characteristic of cognizing the nature of an object, and the mental factors such as feeling, desire, contact, absorption, etc., which is the characteristic of cognizing the individually particularities of an object. No other function of the self can be ascertained, nor any intrinsic nature. Hence, not even its existence can be ascertained, like that of a flower in the sky. Objection: the self does indeed see, hear, smell, taste, think, remember, etc., because the self is the agent, whereas the I and so forth are its instruments. For example, one says that the sickle cuts, although the sickle itself does not cut, but the Devadatta cuts by means of the instrument, that is the sickle. Likewise, one says that the eye, etc., see, but the eye and the other sense organs themselves do not see, etc. Rather, by means of that instrument, the self sees, etc. Thus, according to this method, action is established as follows: because one sees by means of this, it is the eye, etc. Answer: if instrumental status is attributed to such sense organs as the eye, because it is said that knowledge, etc., presupposes an intermediary instrument, or if agent status different from that instrumentality is attributed to the self, like a cutter, this assertion is not logical. Since these sense organs do not have instrumental status because the agent presupposes the arising of causal conditions, the logical reason therefore has an unestablished meaning, or it is inconclusive. The eye sees by if, but it is not the agent of another. Because it hears, it is the ear. Because it smells, it is the nose. Because it tastes, it is the tongue. Because it feels, it is touch. Because it thinks, it is the mind. Because it remembers, it is memory, and so on. The eye itself sees, but the self does not see. Therefore, knowledge, etc., as an agent naturally presuppose a word designating the agent, just as agent status is seen here in the expression Devadatta cuts. Objection: Devadatta does not cut, but rather the sword cuts. Answer: this is not correct because the action will be accomplished here by means of assemblage of the agent and the object of action. Regarding this, one sometimes emphasizes the agent as the chief thing. For example, when saying Devadatta cuts, sometimes one emphasizes the instrument as the chief thing. For example, when saying the sword cuts, the act of cutting depends on both. The instrument does not act without an agent, and the agent too cannot act without an instrument. Without both of these, it is not possible to conceive of an agent and instrument acting independently of each other. Things are brought about due to the assembled conditions, not due to a principal condition. If not so, it is just a metaphor. One may assume the experience of an agent, but it must be said that such an agent exists only on the basis of group, of completely motionless, conditioned entities. Just as when you say the lamp sheds light, although the lamp is only a means whereby you shed light, since the light is brought about dependent on the causal conditions of oil, a wick, a vessel, and a fire. Objection: the self is supreme because dependent on that chief agent, all actions proceed. But the lamp, etc., are just designations, just as the potter himself is the agent, although many conditions such as clay, etc., are present. In reality, there is no fundamental agent, since a man cannot make a pot alone. Therefore, it is not so accepted that a lamp, etc., are merely regarded as an agent in a transfer or figurative sense. The self alone is not the cause of all actions, because those actions are dependent on a complex of causes and conditions. The I, etc., and the lamp, etc., are therefore chief agents, not just metaphorical agents, because the chief agent ruling out those is not established. Conventionally, the collection of causal conditions is shown to be the agent, but in ultimate reality, it is not established that there is any chief agent. Objection: since reality is under consideration by the power of the past, the stream of momentary dharmas cannot be bound or liberated, since what ceases at each instant is without activity. Therefore, one should understand that only the self is the basis of bondage, liberation, and continuance. Answer: although the mind ceases to exist at each instant without independent power and intrinsic nature, it continues like the stream of a river. Refutation of the self as bound or liberated. The mind, which is subjected to such things as desire and attached to the sphere of form, etc., is therefore said to be obstructed from liberation and bound in the prison of samsara, since it is without independence and like the light of insight. When this aggregate of hands and the like is associated with the mind, it is designated sentient being. Because the volition of giving, etc., arises, it is said to be a giver, etc. When knowledge arises due to the bonds of ignorance and the rest being removed, then the continuum of the aggregates itself is freed from the bondage of desire, etc., having accomplished the path of liberation by the illumination of insight consisting of hearing, reflecting, and meditating. It is designated liberated. It is therefore acceptable to say that liberation is the last moment of mind which is arisen and which is superior to the former moment of the complex of mind and mental factors, that of the property of ceasing and arising. But since the self is like the sky, and then all these, namely the self being the basis of bondage and liberation, is very difficult to talk about, since even if the sky is full of snow, hail, wind, etc., defilements are not produced for the sky. Likewise, even if desire, anger, and pride have arisen, there is no change in very self, and therefore it cannot be said to be bound or liberated even with great exertion. If you still greatly cherish yourself due to your attachment to the self by the power of the residues of grasping a self from beginningless time, then why not consider the self as a sky flower, which also has the same characteristic and which therefore also will be a self. I have a friend. He's in the Indian Army, and he's very fond of me. His teacher or the master was a Brahmin, and he used to tell me about the Vedanta rules that the sound happens by itself and there is no agent or someone who created that sound. And without any serious contemplation or thinking, we have to just listen to the sound and we can hear. I tried for some time and I cannot hear anything. So we've completed the chapter number 8, and now we are to the introduction to the examination of the truth of Mimamsa school. Verse number 1. Some people are shameless, thinking little of the right means of deliverance, that is meditation and learning, and asserting to attain it, deliverance only by means of sacrificial rites. On the basis of the scriptural authority, they claim that except for the acts of obligation of grain, cattle, and clarified butter, or the sexual union at the site of sacrifice as prescribed in the sacred literature, no other means is proper to lead people to deliverance. The tea has arrived. So the chanting master is missing here. Please bless the tea. You need a dream and all. Tea? Yeah, now it's comfortable. His Holiness is not very comfortable with the glass, so he's asking his attendant to bring a few of his eyeglasses. No. Do you have cup? It seems His Holiness has missed reading some of the lines.
Something like that.
Recollection of the ultimate Vedas claim to be not a human product.
Yeah. That one. The Veda, which is not produced by humans, should be accepted as authority of knowledge. You know that there is the chant here. It's passed on in unbroken snakes. As there is no reflection of the Vedas claim about human product, as there is no interruption to it. The Dharma
Verse number 4 is there is no recollection of its author. The Veda is claimed to be not a human product. And as there is no interruption in its transmission, this Veda is the surrogate word in its absence. How can there be any understanding about the matters like Savarga or heavenly bliss and Apurva or the consequences of the unforeseen cause and so on, which are beyond the ken of perception by human senses and of which the connection with the marks is unrecognizable? The sound which is eternal is manifested by syllables. Its connection with objects stands eternal. From that connection of word and object, understanding with regard to the object arises for one who understands. The word is ascertained to be eternal because of the reasons that it should work only once, that it is repeated again and again, that it is recognized as such, and that it is in the realm of auditory organ, like wordness. Direct perception, inference, verbal testimony, together with resemblance, presumption, and non-existence. These 6 means of knowledge demonstrate what should be demonstrated. This agama is different from inference, as it is another source of knowledge, like other pranas different from this agama. Further, it produces an produces an understanding about one specific object, as well as many objects in aggregation. As it is the cause of cognition about the matter, of which the connection with the marks is not perceived, and as it is the cause of emergence of the cognitions which have different spheres of activity, agama is another source of knowledge different from inference. Even apurva is materialized by acts of sacrifice. Even for deliverance, the means of achievement is the sacrifice rites, like soma taking and so on, by which a wise man wins a victory over death. This good, old, and reasonable way, which is favored by gods and sages and pursued by the wise, as threefold way, is discarded by those outsiders of the Veda content, by those in shape of women, slaves, and Buddhists. What is here is in others, and what is not here cannot be found in any other either. The group of 4, beginning with Dharma, cannot be found in any other. Logicians who put primary importance on inference explain their standpoint by setting aside threefold way through logical reasoning. Falling is not unlikely in the case of those who put primary importance on reasoning, as in the case of blind men who walk along a precipice by groping the way with their feet. And there is no omniscient being, as such a person is not perceived at present. The omniscience of the Buddha is advocated with intention of winning public confidence. The words of the Buddha is not a right source of cognition, as they are what is produced, like those other than the words of the Buddha. The enlightened one is not an omniscient being, as he is a human being, like those other than the enlightened one. The words of the Buddha are not a right source of cognition, as they hold a way of setting aside threefold Veda. Anything which is like the above-mentioned view, setting aside the threefolded view, is like the above-mentioned, not a right source of cognition, like the view of the naked Jains. The end of the Purva, Bhaka, or the opponent's view, in the 9th chapter of the Madhyamaka Hridaya Karika. On the omniscience of the Buddha, the Nirgantharas point out various passages in the Buddhist scriptures that apparently show the Buddha to have been very human indeed. Many of his actions can only be accounted for by assuming his deep ignorance of the motives of other human beings. Bai argues that this is a misunderstanding. The Buddha merely pretended to be ignorant, the reason being that he was motivated by the desire to help ignorant human beings overcome their passions, so he had to pay along their lines. The Buddha always had a good reason to appear not to be omniscient. For the reasons already given above, the Buddha is in fact omniscient. Here, Baya summarizes his position. The Buddha is praised for having preached 2 truths. The true relative truth is a means of achieving the absolute truth. It is Baya hope, as a scientific author of the Madhyamaka Hridaya, to be able to have intelligent students in obtaining bodhi. The text itself is described as a shastra that serves as a mirror in which one can see the contents of numerous sutras reflected in brief form. Moreover, one can even infer that this Veda must have an evil human being as its author or creator. This is because the Vedas recommend abhorrent rituals such as slaughter of animals and drinking of alcohol, just like the sacred text of the Persian Magga. Perhaps you maintain that violence does not give an undesirable result either because one is protected by a mantra, as in the case of consuming poison, or it is prescribed in the holy text, just as generosity is. But this is wrong. The first argument is not to the point, for then one could obviously justify illicit intercourse by means of mantras, seduction, magic, powder, etc. The second argument is also not to point, for generosity may be associated with consumption of alcohol. If one wants to protect oneself with a mantra in order to commit a murder, it will have undesirable results for the person responsible. It is as dangerous as to employ poison and weapons. Opponent, what? If it says so in our own sacred text, reply, then it is also perfectly all right to murder people in order to liberate them from samsara. But if the reason is stated in a general sense, would it then be established for any one of us? No, so it proves nothing. If the opponent thinks that it does not give an undesirable result to slaughter cattle during a sacrifice, because one does it for the same purpose that one does something for the sake of a priest, it is, for instance, all right to cook food for them. Reply, this must mean that animals are created for the sake of those who eat them, for they have to be enjoyed just like a woman. Therefore, it has not been established that animals have been created for the purpose of sacrifice. So the reason for the creation of animals, namely sacrifice, remains unestablished. Even in a sacred place such as Antharvedi, this kind of violence in yajna gives an undesirable result in the future for the person responsible, because it is deliberate cold-blooded murder, just as any kinds of violence. Another reason why we think that violence during a sacrifice has an undesirable result is that deliberate murder inflicts suffering upon its victims, just like other kinds of violence or slaughter. So surely, whether the authority is seen or not seen, a ritual action brings about a result that corresponds to the evil action of one who commits it. This is because it is motivated by violence, just like other ritual actions. Consumption of alcohol, etc. is explained by a prohibition which has the same purpose as above, namely to prevent undesirable results. One should not consume alcohol because it causes intoxication, just as a poisonous apple does. One cannot render consumption of alcohol harmless by protecting oneself with the mantra during the sacrifice, for alcohol may still make one intoxicated. Thus, for instance, in other cases, one is seen to be intoxicated because one assumes the protection of a mantra. If the opponent thinks that one cannot be certain of heaven and Dharma, since without the agama of the Vedas there is no visible sign, can one who is certain not have a certain understanding by inferring these things from a sign? In other words, the validity of agama must be ascertained by means of anumana. To say that the word is permanent because it never occurs twice is also wrong, because the reason is uncertain. Since, for instance, the same lamp also never occurs twice, still it is not on that account permanent. Why do you not accept that the word is impermanent because it exists like a ritual action, or that it is impermanent because it gives rise to ideas, just as the moments of the body? The two other reasons given above in 7, namely that the word is permanent because it can be repeated or studied and recognized, are not appropriate, for repetition or study and recognition are always experienced to be impermanent. Since it has not been established that the word is permanent to be like a word, it cannot be used as an example. Moreover, the word cannot be expressed in sounds, because expressions, manifestations in general, has been refuted. If you think that the word is audible, why do you also maintain that it must be expressed in sounds? This is unnecessarily absurd. The understanding of the meaning of a word depends, in our opinion, on convention. It follows as a word. If there is no convention to begin with, then understanding is not possible at all. Understanding arises from the repetition of a convention, since this, like samsara, is without beginning. Moreover, what gives anumana the status of pramana is that it is not different from the one of agama, that is the same nature. Therefore, the argument mentioned, because it is a pramana, is uncertain. Moreover, the other reason for saying that agama is different from anumana, namely because it has a different object, it gives rise to ideas of manifold object, is also not valid. You may think so, but others, such as Buddhists, do not. Since it is impossible without a plurality, we also maintain that anumana gives rise to an understanding of a manifold object. Therefore, we do not differentiate it from language, which is in fact contained in anumana.
Inference.
Since one can understand an understandable object with no visible connection to a mark by inferring it from something else, therefore it is not observably different from anumanam. This Holiness is talking about the animal slaughter in the name of offering. So hundreds and thousands of animals, especially chickens, are slaughtered every day. So continuously reading. Moreover, since it is the cause of an understanding of something beyond perception, language is not different from anumana. This is because it, like anumana itself, depends on the recollection of a connection between a mark and that which may be inferred from that mark based on previous experience. Moreover, apurva is not suggested in ritual action, for this can be refuted, just like the manifestation of the word is refuted. Also, we think that apurva is impermanent because, like a jar, it is something manifest. Moreover, we maintain that the result of ritual action, such as drinking soma, is impermanent. This is because it is outcome of an action, as for instance, the result of an activity motivated by desire. A ritual action such as drinking of soma cannot possibly make one obtain liberation because it is an action. Likewise, an action motivated by desire is not acceptable. Therefore, by following this path of the three Vedas, one cannot overcome death. It is only accepted by people seduced by others, people with minds unable to analyze things correctly. It is quite logical to reject the three Vedas when one notices the thoroughly vicious behavior of the prophets of the path of three Vedas, that is Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva. As fire burns fuel, this man of insight burn evil karma with their insight, so it must be due to a special power that they do not face an evil destiny. The kind of insight that men of insight acknowledge is one that is capable of burning away the vices. Therefore, a man of insight does not commit any evil. This is because the cause of evil, namely ignorance, cannot possibly arise in him. Others have been corrupted by those who have deviated from the right way, claiming that the yoga of perfection, Siddhi Yoga, is not salute even by a criminal action such as murder of a priest. Nor do we believe that the mind of Brahma, etc., sees things as they actually are. How in the world could Brahma and Shiva be so stupid as to fall in love with Tilottama? How could Shiva burn Tripura without first having been influenced by the fire of anger? How could he knock out the teeth of Pushan or the two eyes of Bhaga? If God can kill a priest, drink alcohol, or be in love, and still can have seen the truth, what can one say of those who, following his path, have not seen the truth? And how could Vishnu or Krishna, without mercy, deprive Kesin, Kanura, or the demon, Naraka, and others of their lives and their possessions? If Hari, who is Vishnu or Krishna, is considered to have seen the truth when he takes another man's women and goods, when he drinks alcohol and kills living beings, then he cannot compete with bandits and robbers. Opponent, if he is good at protecting people, then it is not a sin for him to kill demons who are enemies of God, as long as it is his desire to protect Dharma. Reply, but if it is his desire to protect Dharma, why not abandon actions such as adultery, theft, deceit, and dishonesty? But if Adharma is not his domain, why is he responsible for its creation? Or has it been created by gods who fail to recognize their own faults because they were ignorant? If it is out of desire that God protects the world, how can he, being a slave of desire, be an accomplished and perfect being a God should be? If, on the other hand, he does so out of compassion, why did he always confuse the world with all his tricks? Why does he not have compassion for all the living beings who suffer from death, rebirth, etc.? Since he is supposed to regard everything with equanimity, it is not proper for him to have an enemy. How can such a behavior that is so filled with desire, hatred, and ignorance be ascribed to Hari? And how can he be a Superman when he behaves in a manner so unworthy of a nobleman? If our opponents imagine that Hari has an entirely different body that is blissful, it is of course the one that ascetics see and are no more reborn. It is considered not to exist, or not to exist, not to exist, and not to exist. And so it is beyond being, non-being, and being and non-being. Therefore, it is considered to be different from the material form such as fish, etc. It cannot, because it is different, be permanent. But if it is the same, because it is not different, then like the other form, it is also not blissful. If one, on the other hand, assumes that this real soul has two bodies, one that is not blissful and one that is blissful, then his chaste wife is actually unchaste because she is only devoted to one half of his body. Also, if one cannot say that it exists, etc., it is not logical to speak of a higher form of Hari. Of course, for something to be higher, it must exist, and for something to be a cause, it must also exist. Cause of creation, it must also exist. Since we have already refuted that God is the creator of the world, the refutation of his being different from the world is also like before. He is not the cause of the world, and his higher is not differentiated from his material form. Moreover, he is not immortal, for he is not even born. If immortal is something real, that such as always changes, then it is destroyed like taste, etc. If immortal is something unreal, then it is as unreal as a flower in the sky. It is not possible for him to exist and not to exist, just as it is not possible for fire to be hot and cold. Again, how can he possibly be spoken of as immortal if he is also said to be unspeakable? Nor can he be unspeakable, for this can be refuted, just as the self. But can he not somehow, due to immortality, remain immortal? If so, as immortal will be, would he not always remain immortal? There is no example of this, so it is impossible. So there is no immortal form of Hari. So how can yogis longing for liberation become liberated by taking as object of meditation? These are the material form of which has only been introduced to cover up a calamity. If opponent thinks that a devotee of him is liberated by withdrawing his senses from the objects of the senses as a tortoise withdraws its limbs and by mindfully uttering the syllable Om, then he is mistaken. The devotees of Hari are not liberated by visualizing Hari, for they are still bound by ideas and recollections because they visualize Hari. Nor do we accept that the mind of a yogi will become free even if it is not conceptual. This is because it forcibly still holds on to signs, so much the more a mind that is full of images. Since they are deeply steeped in desire and other passions like primitive tribesmen, Brahma and the other gods do not, of course, have the curiosity about causality, which ought to draw it towards scientific studies. Real protection of Dharma would consist either in teaching the true Dharma to others or realizing it personally, but with regard to gods, it is in both cases in a bad state. Each one of the gods claim that he alone is the cause of creation. So here one must decide whose word is true and whose is not true. If one says that there is no problem since they are all one, how can it be that only Brahma is said to be a killer of Brahma? If one denies that they are one and the same, then their unity is illogical. But assuming that there is no essential difference among the three gods, how can one's divinity be a trinity? Since they do not know the cause of suffering, how can they tell us how to get relief from it? Since the teachings etc. in the Vedas and Yoga are deficient when they are talking about this suffering etc., it cannot first of all be by teaching the true Dharma that they are able to protect the Dharma. Moreover, since their personal understanding is deficient, they are not able to lead others to peace and freedom from suffering. It would be as if a guide who has fallen into a precipice were to lead others along his own path. One must scrutinize the mass of bad logic in the three Vedas put together by mistaken arguments that have been arranged by the web of conceptual constructions. If one does so, it is logical that the three Vedas are rejected. I have already stated earlier that the universe does not have God etc. as its cause. Even if one assumes God etc. as its cause, what exactly has it created? First of all, it cannot be maintained that the soul has been created by him. This is because it cannot be created at all, nor can it be maintained that he is responsible for Dharma, for they have always been his attributes, just as they are so today. Moreover, the body is necessary for perceiving pleasure, and pain is produced by those two Dharma and Adharma. Therefore, the body that living beings are in possession of cannot possibly have been created by one of the gods. The body that incarnated beings possess at the beginning of a kalpa must be caused by invisible Dharma and Adharma done previously. This is because it is the body that is the cause of the arising of the pleasure and pain, just as the present body. If the almighty status of the Almighty God is supposed to be created by good karma, then the Almighty is not almighty, since he must depend on that good karma. If the almighty status of the Almighty God is supposed to be entirely accidental, then he must have this in common with others also. Therefore, the Almighty God is not almighty. If you say that God consists in spirit, then the world created by him must also be, according to you, consist entirely in spirit. This is because an effect must be in conformance with its causes. If God is its causes, the world would have had to be possess subtlety and the seven other attributes of the God. In other words, if the world does not possess subtlety, etc., God could not be its causes. If God were responsible for doing karma, he would also have to boil in the hells. If one assumes that it is the others than himself that have to be boiled in hells, then actions done are lost and actions not done come back. This is obviously against the law of karma. Moreover, assuming that the cause of suffering is permanent, how then can such suffering be extinguished? Clearly, as long as a fire is burning, its heat is not extinguished. Moreover, if God is one and not manifold, how can he be responsible for a manifold effect? Nor can the manifoldness that he, as one, is considered responsible for possibly be due to his manifold desires, etc. If the cause of the world, as claimed, is a God that is permanent without parts and subtle, what can be more odd than to say that he is also one and omnipresent? If his motive for this is likely to play, then the result of such a play must be pleasure. Since pleasure only depends on itself for motivation, the Almighty God cannot be Almighty, since, as said, it is subject to pleasure. Homage to the terrible God, Rudra, whose name corresponding to what he actually is, he delights in the helpless animals that are afraid of being devoured by one another, and also in the inhabitants of hell who are tormented by clashings, cuttings, burnings, etc. And he also delights in human beings haunted by rebirth, old age, disease, fever, sorrow, and exhaustions. It is obviously the whim of God that some miserly men are rich, that some good men live as parasites, and some immoral people are reborn in heavens. So we have to draw a distinction between attachment and compassion. So attachment is usually towards those your dear ones and the loved ones. But compassion is towards all animals. So if you have to, so therefore our general attachment or the compassion is usually mixed with attachment. So therefore it is very important to draw a distinction between, or draw a line between the compassion and the attachment. It is obviously the whim of God that man rich in virtues have a short life, that rocks have a long life, and that generous people have little wealth. So when we speak about being compassionate, of course, we have to feel compassionate even to our enemies, all the gods and the demons who really harm other peoples and to the whole world. So these are the really objects or the persons to whom we have to practice compassion. So continuously reading. Some Buddhists are naturally happy, but why are some of their devotees suffering? Why do some good people following the commandments of the God not commit evil? The answer to one who does not understand manifoldness and karma is that karma is its cause. Hereby I have refuted that Brahma and Krishna are responsible for the creation of the world. It is also wrong to think as follows. In the Shiva Tantra, having closed the door of the mind, the yogi places his mind in Shiva. Then he meditates on the syllable Om while fixing his concentration in his heart. When one has thus first concentrated one's mind by trying hard to keep it concentrated on earth, etc., one becomes free from suffering when the Lord Shiva is propitious. It is wrong, for as long as a mental cognition arises, there cannot possibly be liberation. Likewise, there cannot possibly be liberation before a mental cognition arises. It is illogical for the devotees of the God to become liberated by seeing an image of Shiva, because their mind is fixed on an object just when they see an image. Moreover, if God were the cause of suffering, then it cannot be counteracted because it is permanent. Therefore, it is not possible for any devotee of God to reach the end of suffering by seeing God. Thus the remaining adherents of Brahma, Vishnu and the soul have been refuted, and so one should not take any pleasure of mind in God, etc., for that will be illogical. Moreover, when one sees that it is recommended in the three Vedas that one washes away one's sins with water as a sort of trade in good and bad karma, it is logical that these three Vedas are rejected. Sins cannot be washed away with water. This is because it cannot be touched, it cannot be seen, it cannot be emotion, and because it is determined by mental impressions, just like memory, knowledge, etc. Water from the Pushkara, the Ganges, etc., cannot remove one's sins. This is because it can be touched and because it can be moistened, just like the stinking drainage water in the house. If by bathing in a river, etc., one could get rid of one's bad karma, done earlier would this not create unfounded suffering or innocent people who make an ablution at the same bathing place? Opponent. But assuming that karma cannot be destroyed, then nobody can get rid of his sins. It is the inner soul that is affected by water of ablution. Reply, if you say so, this is also wrong. It is inconceivable that a sin is transferred from the soul of one person to that of another. This is because sin such as bad karma is not something material. Likewise, desire, hatred, delusion, etc. cannot be transferred from one soul to another. One cannot be sure that it is not possible to give and receive good and bad karma. This is because it is bound up with the mind. The same goes for pleasure and pain. Seeing in the three Vedas and the bad rule that one can go to the world of Brahma, etc., by hurling oneself into flames, etc., it is logical that the three Vedas are rejected. Throwing oneself into a fire, etc., is not the cause of obtaining the world of Brahma, etc. This is because one only brings harm upon oneself, just as when a night moth throws itself into a fire. Nor do we accept that abstention from food and drinking can bring one to heaven. This is because it only brings about hunger, pain, etc., just as in the case of anoxuria, etc., opponent. But it is good karma not to eat, etc., for it is a kind of renunciation, just as when one abandons evil. Reply, if so, your argument is rendered inconclusive by the fact that one can renounce truth, etc., is a bad thing. Abstention from food does not in itself lead one to good karma, for in itself such an action as eating food is not sinful. It would be like a man of good intentions having abstained from his intentions. It is not to be considered a sin to eat meat, if only it is pure from the 3 points of view. This is because meat is only a transformation of juice, etc. Likewise, it is not a sin to eat baked food. It is not from an evil motive that one is inclined to eat meat, because it is in order to counteract hunger, as in the case of a meal obtained unexpectedly. If you think that meat is not to be eaten because it is impure, then think of your own body also. It is caused and supported. It is caused and supported by seeds, just as an impure worm feeding on odor. If you find it reprehensible to eat meat and fish because it is born from semen, viral, etc., then this reason is incompatible with the fact that butter, milk, etc. also have the same origin. If you think that a carnivorous person kills an animal because killing must be his inner motive, then somewhere later renders this argument quite uncertain. It is not a sin to eat meat, for while doing so, one does not make the living animal suffer. It is just as harmless as making use of pearls, a peacock's tail, etc., and grain of rice and water. Eating meat is not the cause of desire, for it arises from the will. This is clear from the fact that it also arises without this, as in the case of cattle eating grass. Seeing in the three Vedas the bad doctrine that an imagined soul exists in things that have no soul, it is logical that the three Vedas are rejected. Of course, trees do not have a soul, for they are not included in the 4 groups of living beings arising from a womb. Moreover, they do not move even when cut right through, it being a fact that they are inanimate like a cloth. If you still are convinced that various kinds of mimosa have a soul, because of their contraction when touched, just like a millipede, then there is one given by you is then the reason given by you is rendered uncertain by the fact that hair, etc., touched by fire also are contracted without therefore being alive, and in particular by the contraction of hair that has been treated with pulverized quicksilver. Of course, it is not possible to claim that trees have a soul just because they can be healed. This reason will be inconclusive because something like wine that have lost its spirit can have it restored. This does not imply that it has a soul. Opponent, But can trees not be maintained to have a soul because their procreation is similar, because they grow as they bud before season by the touch of a lovely girl, etc., because they are born in season, and because they can sleep just like a horse, etc.? Reply: trees cannot be proved to have a soul, for this is at variance with the fact that ulcers, corals, cat's eyes, hair, golden nuggets, and the like can grow without having a soul. Since all these are absolutely without soul, the 5 arguments given, namely Dvata, etc., are not established. Therefore, the arguments are either meaningless, or in the case of remaining 3, rendered inconclusive by the fact that diseases such as leprosy occur without being animate, etc. It is due to the overwhelming power of the karma of creatures that trees, etc., gradually grow. The same goes for the trees with the sword in hell and the jewel trees in the world of heaven. What if the opponent tries to prove that the way of the 3 Vedas is true either because it has been preached by Brahma or because it has been preached by sages who know the past and the future, as in the case of something said by a learned doctor, for instance? The argument that the way of the 3 Vedas has been preached by Brahma is given by those who make him the creator of the world, etc. I have already proved that this is a wrong idea. Therefore, you cannot be sure of this argument. In some cases, he sees things as they are, but these words are not always true. Likewise, the words of cowards and madmen are not always true. Even animals and so on may have knowledge of the past and the future, but it is not everything the sages have said that they have understood. Therefore, their words must be analyzed for arguments. The opponent said that the Dharma, etc., found here in the 3 Vedas is also to be found elsewhere, but actually in some cases, the words of Vedas are like the syllables of a worm carved in wood. In other cases, they just happen to be nicely spoken. For example, some jeweler may spot a jewel in a pile of waste. He recognizes it as he is aware of its power and origin. It would be like a Buddhist discovering some nice remark in the 3 Vedas. A jewel does not originally belong to a heap of waste in an alley. If one does not investigate what is logical and what is not logical by means of anumana free from faults, then one's understanding will be formed by other traditions, and therefore one will be in doubt about their traditions. It is like a man wanting to cross a large river who gets hold of a boat. Likewise, one must first hold on to anumana, even if one has to abandon it later on. Following mere words and going along with the path like blind men here, in this circuit fools resolve in samsara. Just as blind men without anything to hold on to must follow a dreadful path, thus it is all too easy to fall for those who put too much emphasis on the mere words of Agama. The epithet omniscient can correctly be applied to the Buddha in certain cases. The word lion is also true to life in some cases, when speaking of real lions, but occasionally it is used in a figurative sense. For example, when speaking of a brave man, etc. In our opinion, the Dharma and the Nirmankaya do not belong to a human being. Nor can Tathagata be proved to be a human being as assumed. Therefore, the example is not conclusive. Opponent, if you are entitled to opine that Bhagavat is not omniscient, am I not likewise entitled to opine that Samkara or Shiva, Vishnu, etc. know everything? Reply: if it were that their kind of knowledge were omniscient, then they still seem to see things with a cataract of ignorance. They do not seem to see things with a clear eye. If, on the other hand, you think that they are omniscient in the sense that they know enough, this argument is not valid for lepers, etc. Also know enough without being truly omniscient. Opponent: but the Buddha only knows certain things, he does not know everything. Reply: what is it that the Muni does not know? Is it the way to Savarga or Apavarga? For he teaches the way based on his teaching. Opponent, even though he teaches this way, it may be wrong. Reply, if you have this silly idea, it must be due to ignorance. The reply to this has already been given. Moreover, the standpoint that our sacred texts, ideas and words are not valid because they are created should be answered in the same way. The mind that analyzes is uncertain since it is created. Therefore, the argument is fallacious. Just because I think that the three Vedas can be criticized in the same way that the Jains do, this does not mean that I follow their religion. Therefore, the comparison is also not good. I think we will stop here for the day. So the following is actually refuting the ideas of the Shiva. Actually, the Lord deity of the Dharamsala is also Ishvara or the Shiva, and I'm also a good friend of the Lord Shiva. So the permanent residence of the Lord Shiva is actually the Mount Kailash. Mount Kailash is also actually in Tibet. So the permanent residence, the permanent abode of Ishvara, since it is in Tibet, so Ishvara is also a Tibetan god. I think there is actually a reason behind it. If we speak about the philosophical differences, even within the different Buddhist schools, we have so many different views. We have only a few pages left for tomorrow, and when we finish reading the few pages tomorrow, we will do the Manjushri's permission or the blessing tomorrow. I think only 3 or 4 pages left, so I think I will continue to read and finish it today. So I will also read from here. The argument that the way of the three Vedas has been preached by Brahma is given by those who make him the creator of the world, etc. I have already proved that this is a wrong idea. Therefore, you cannot be sure of this argument. In some cases, he thinks as they are, but his words are not always true. Likewise, the words of cowards and madmen are not always true. So I'll continue to read from the last few pages. Seeing in the three Vedas the bad rule that one can go to the wall of Brahma, etc. by hurling oneself into flames, etc., it is logical that the three Vedas are rejected. Throwing oneself into a fire, etc., is not the course of obtaining the world of Brahma, etc. This is because one only brings harm upon oneself, just as when a night moth throws itself into a fire. Nor do we accept that abstention from food and drinking can bring one to heaven. This is because it only brings about hunger, pain, etc., just as in the case of anacorexia. Upon it, it is good karma not to eat, etc., for it is a kind of renunciation, just as when one abandons evil. Reply: if so, your argument is rendered inconclusive by the fact that one can renounce truth, etc. It's a bad thing. Abstention from food does not in itself lead one to good karma, for in itself such an action as eating food is not sinful. It would be like a man of good intentions having abstained from his intentions. It is not to be considered a sin to eat meat, if only it is pure from the 3 points of view. This is because meat is only a transformation of juice, etc. Likewise, it is not a sin to eat back food. It is not from an evil motive that one is inclined to eat meat, because it is in order to counteract hunger, as in the case of a meal obtained unexpectedly. If you think that meat is not to be eaten because it is impure, then think of your own body also. It is caused and supported by seeds, just as an impure womb fitting on order. If you find it reprehensible to eat meat and fish because it is born from semen, etc., then this reason is not compatible with the fact that butter, milk, etc. also have the same origin. If you think that a carnivorous person kills an animal because killing must be his inner motive, then somewhere later render this argument quite uncertain. It is not a sin to eat meat, for while doing so, one does not make the living animal suffer. It is just as harmless as making use of pearls, a peacock's tail, etc., and grain of rice and water. Eating meat is not the cause of desire, for it arises from the will. This is clear from the fact that it also arises without this, as in the case of eating grass. Seeing in the three Vedas the bad doctrine that an imagined soul exists in things that have no soul, it is logical that the three Vedas are rejected. Of course, trees do not have a soul, for they are not included in the 4 groups of living beings arising from a womb. Moreover, they do not move even when they are cut through, it being a fact that they are inanimate like a cloth. If you still are convinced that various kinds of mimosa have a soul because of their counteraction when touched, just like a millipede, then the reason given by you is rendered uncertain by the fact that hair, etc., touched by fire also are contracted without, therefore being alive, and in particular by the contraction of hair that has been treated with pulverized quicksilver. Of course, it is not possible to claim that trees have a soul just because they can be healed. This reason will be inconclusive because something like wine that has lost its spirit can have it restored. This does not imply that it has a soul. Opponent, but can trees not be maintained to have a soul because their procreation is similar, because they grow as they bud before season by the touch of a lovely girl, etc., because they are born in season and because they can sleep, just like a horse, etc. Reply: trees cannot be proved to have a soul, for this is at variance with the fact that ulcers, corals, cat's eye, hair, golden nugget, and the like can grow without having a soul. Since all these are absolutely without soul, the five arguments given, namely the Vada, etc., are not established. Therefore, the arguments are either meaningless or, in the case of remaining three, rendered inconclusive by the fact that diseases such as leprosy occur without being animate. It is due to the overwhelming power of the karma of creatures that trees, etc., gradually grow. The same goes for the trees with the sword in hell and the jewel trees in the world of heaven. What if the opponent tries to prove that the way of the three Vedas is true, either because it has been preached by Brahma or because it has been preached by the sages who know the past and the future, as in the case of something said by the learned doctor, for instance? The argument that the way of the three Vedas has been preached by Brahma is given by those who make him the creator of the world. I have already proved that this is a wrong idea. Therefore, you cannot be sure of this argument. So this verse is actually similar to what Lord Buddha says, that the sins cannot be washed away with water and the suffering cannot be picked away. But it is only through the teaching and the showing path by the Buddha that we have to follow, that we can be practiced. So these lines are similar to this quotation. In the Vedas, it is written that the sins can be washed by taking a bath in the river Ganges and so on. So these are cannot be proven by reasons. So continuously reading, even animals and so on may have knowledge of the past and the future, but it is not everything that the sages have said that they have understood. Therefore, their words must be analyzed for arguments. The opponent said that the Dharma, etc., found here in the three Vedas are also to be found elsewhere, but actually in some cases, the words of the Vedas are like the syllables of a warm calf in wood. In other cases, they just happen to be nicely spoken. It would be like a Buddhist discovering some nice remark in the three Vedas. A jewel does not originally belong to a heap of waste in an alley. If one does not investigate what is logical and what is not logical by means of anumana free from faults, then one's understanding will be formed by other traditions, and therefore one will be in doubt about their traditions. It is like a man wanting to cross a large river who gets hold of a boat. Likewise, one must first hold on to anumana, even if one has to abandon it later on. Following mere words and going along with the past like blind men here in this circuit, fools revolve in samsara. Just as blind men without anything to hold on to must follow a dreadful path, thus it is all too easy to fall for those who put too much emphasis on the mere words of agama. The epithet omniscient can correctly be applied to the Buddha in certain cases. The word lion is also true to life in some cases when speaking of real lions, but occasionally it is used in a figurative sense, for example when speaking of a brave man, etc. In our opinion, the Dharma and the Nirmankaya do not belong to a human being, nor can Tathagata be proved to be a human being as assumed. Therefore, it is not conclusive. Opponent, if you are entitled to opine that Bhagavad is not omniscient, am I not likewise entitled to opine that Samkara or Shiva, Vishnu, etc. know everything? Reply, if it were true that their kind of knowledge were omniscient, then they still seem to see things with the cataract of ignorance. They do not seem to see things with a clear eye. If, on the other hand, you think that they are omniscient in the sense that they know enough, this argument is not valid, for labyrinths, etc. also know enough without being truly omniscient. Opponent, but the Buddha only knows certain things, he does not know everything. Reply, what is it that the Muni does not know? Is it the way to Svarga and Apavarga? No. For he teaches the way based on his teaching. Opponent, even though he teaches this way, it may be wrong. Reply, if you have his silly idea, it must be due to ignorance. The reply to this has already been given. So this verse actually relates to the consumption of meat, and in the Mahayana Sutras, the consumption of meat has been completely refuted. And but there are certain texts in the Vinaya where a certain kind of meat, which is actually said to be purified by 3 forms, are allowed. So in the certain Vinaya Sutras, when we refer to the consumption of the allowance, there are certain allowance of the meat, which is actually said to be purified in the 3 forms. So this allowance regarding if the meat you haven't seen the animal being slaughtered by your own eyes, and you haven't heard that it has been slaughtered or killed for your own purpose, consumption, and there is not any doubt regarding that matter. So if the meat is clear of these 3 qualities, then one is allowed to eat this kind of meat, which is said to be free from 3 purities. And this is said to be similar to a food or a meal that is being given to a beggar. The beggar has the right to eat any kind of the meal that is being offered, that is being given to him or her. Because the main purpose of consumption of that kind of meat is only for the purpose of eliminating one's hunger. So, So we believe that the trees also have the life. They also said to be included as living beings. We have a congregation and a meeting before with all the Jain's masters. So they do have many series of the reasonings, not just limited to the reason that they fold their leaves in the evening and said to be sleeping. So in our Tibetan text, usually when it comes to the Brahmana debate, we usually criticize the notion that the trees do have life because they fold their leaves at night while they're sleeping. So this is not entirely correct. When it comes to their own text, they do have many more reasons other than that. So there is a series of debate here with respect to the consumption of the meat according to the Vinaya Sutra. So just by the reason that the meat is by nature a very contaminated food for eating, by nature it is very unclean, then even our body itself is not pure. It is filled with all the bloods and the fleshes inside. And all our body parts, including from our head to the nails of the fingers, and all our muscles and fingers are all made up of contaminated substances. Similarly, our organs inside. And if they continue to refute, criticize, and saying that even the fish and so on are contaminated and cannot be eaten, just as any kind of the meat, because they came through contaminated sources, then the same case is with the butter and the milk and so on. So the origination of the butter and the milk is same, so therefore we won't be able to even consume the butter and the milk and so on. But then ultimately, if they still criticize that in order to eat meat, we have to kill an animal. So by eating the meat, so the killing of the animal happens. Then the critic further says that it is the same case with the purchase or buying of the leathers, or even the horns of the animals, or the bones of the animals, and so on. So when it comes to recognizing a special teaching, so there are few fault ways of recognizing. So the first thing is to consider your own traditions or the teachings as the supreme, and rejecting all other traditions is one of the faults. Then second thing is even all the scriptural teachings are not considered as an authentic, but merely considering the reasoning is also in fault. So therefore, it is very important to find reason with whatever the teachings are there, and not merely following the oral teachings of a person. So therefore, if someone is led by without knowing the way, and the guide do not have any idea about the places where it is going, so similarly, all the people who are following that guide may also lead to a wrong place. So therefore, we have to follow a guidance who is omniscient and who understands all the natures and so on. So therefore, the omniscient, the term omniscient can be only subject to the Buddha. So when we speak about the four forms of the Buddha, so Lord Buddha himself is only the embodiment of all these kayas. So we're reading from this line, the effort that omniscient can correctly be applied to the Buddha in certain cases. Just as the word line is also true to life in some cases when speaking of real lines. But occasionally it is used in a figurative sense when speaking of a brave man, etc. In our opinion, the Dharma and the Nirmanakaya do not belong to a human being, nor Tathagata be proved to be a human being as assumed. Therefore, it is not conclusive. Opponent, if you are entitled to opine that Bhagavad is not omniscient, am I not likewise entitled to opine that Shiva, Vishnu, etc. know everything? Reply, if it were true that their kind of knowledge were omniscient, then they still seem to see things with a cataract of ignorance. They do not seem to see things with a clear eye. If on the other hand you think that they are omniscient in the sense that they know enough, this argument is not valid, for laborers, etc. also know enough without being truly omniscient. Opponent, but the Buddha only knows certain things, he does not know everything. Reply, what is it that the Muni does not know? Is it the way to Swarga or the Apavarga? No, for he teaches the way based on his teaching. Opponent, even though he teaches this way, it may be wrong. Reply, if you have this silly idea, it must be due to ignorance. The reply to this has already been given. So here completes the 9th chapter. On the omniscience of the Buddha, the Nirgandas point out various passages in the Buddhist scriptures that apparently show the Buddha to have been very human indeed. Many of his actions can only be accounted for by assuming his deep ignorance of the motives for other human beings. Bhava accused that this is a misunderstanding. The Buddha merely pretended to be ignorant, the reason being that he was motivated by the desire to have ignorant human beings overcome their passions, so he had to play along their lines. The Buddha always have a reason to appear, not to be omniscient. For the reasons already given above, the Buddha is in fact omniscient. So the chapter 10 actually proves the Lord Buddha, present the Lord Buddha as the omniscient one. Here the Jainism, the proponents of the Jainism schools put forward the critics that the Lord Buddha is not omniscient, because when he was asked with the 14 different questions regarding 14 different questions with the base of the selflessness and so on, so Lord Buddha responded without giving any positive response with a yes or no, but merely remaining silent, so which is called a neutral answer. So for example, the first one is whether there is an beginning or the end to the samsara or not, and so on. So at these questions put forward by the proponents of the masters of the Jainism school, so Lord Buddha remained silent. So their critic is that the remaining silent was not an actual answer or actual response. So therefore, Lord Buddha cannot be considered as an omniscient being. So the response to those critics by the proponent of the Jainism school was that those questions were actually asked with the base or the foundation understanding that the self was the Atma does exist. So Lord Buddha cannot respond in either positive or negative, because whatever the responses come, it has to come with the basis of the presentation the self as an Atman, so which is not true in Buddhist schools. So therefore, Lord Buddha remains silent. So therefore, Lord Buddha, having understood the mentalities of those who were put forward the critics, therefore he remains silent, and it is not due to not understanding the matter. So in this chapter here, Bhava summarizes his position. The Buddha is praised for having preached two truths. The true relative truth is a means of achieving the absolute truth. It is by his hope as a scientific author of the Madhyamika Hridaya to be able to have intelligent students in obtaining Bodhi. The text itself is described as the Shastra that serves as a mirror in which one sees the contents of the numerous sutras reflected in brief form. So Lord Buddha has been praised here as the teacher who presents the two truths, the conventional truth and the ultimate truth. And all the sentient beings who are suffering in this world are not having understood the true truths as they are. So in the blaze of reasoning, and also the essence of the middle way and its commentary, blaze of reasoning. So in these two texts, all the positions of the proponents of those different traditions that exist, non-Buddhist traditions that exist during Lord Buddha's times, are presented very clearly here. So here completes the annotated the text, and composed by Bhavaviveka. The translator Shiriyana and Nangso Pantida Jalon Sudum Java. Devamkara Shiriyana and Nangso Pantida Jalon Sudum Java. So they are the translators. So the colophon I've already read before. My request to write these texts, the annotated text. Here completed the essence of the middle way philosophy. And this will be really a kind of very important text for those who are studying the middle way philosophy. It will be a kind of an extra source and a text for you as a reference. So till here we have completed this time's teaching. I have brought this text to the Bodh Gaya at that time, and I was hoping to do the transmission, but I was not feeling well and cannot do that. So here, this time I've really worked hard to complete the text. And you have all gathered here out of great devotion and out of great interest. And that has really been great. And that's all. As I have said before, the weather was very cold. I think those who are fat here, I think you have not feel so much cold, but those especially coming from the South India must have feel very cold. So from tomorrow onwards you can start living. Tomorrow morning we have a short initiation from the Manjushri's blessing. It will be a very simple teaching, and I usually do it always. We will do the Bodhisattva generation at the beginning, so that's all.